AI in education is actually a debate about academic integrity. How do we raise children who are invested in their own learning and understand the purpose of the tasks they're being set? The issue we face today is the same one that we faced always when a big societal or technological change comes along. How do we continue to educate children to come and know and understand the world and their place in it as the basis for responsible participation in community? That's what education's about. And AI doesn't change that debate, but it does, I think, bring it into sharper focus. Discussions of AI often seem to be accompanied by a level of hysteria and polarisation of views. And just looking at a selection of BBC News articles from January, that divide into camps of AI that it's evil and it's going to destroy the world, and the camp that it's amazing and it's going to change the world and save the world, is really quite stark. And then there's also that group of, well, it doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, you're going to need to use AI to get a job, so we need to make sure we embrace it. And that's probably the three categories that the AI articles are falling into. And as a school, it's our job to take a step back and to look at the facts and present a nuanced, balanced view that will allow us to support our children effectively going forward. And part of that involves looking at the current role of AI in society and looking at the research surrounding AI in education. So one question we need to consider is, as adults, how many of us are using artificial intelligence tools either at work or at home fairly regularly? And at the parent partnership evening, just taking a quick vote, it was most of the room. So if that's happening in the adult world, then we need to step back and look at what is happening and what is appropriate for our children. So the second question I ask is, as adults, for how many of us does our job require us to take closed book assessments where we can't use AI tools during the assessment? And actually, it's relatively few. But that is the reality of life for our children. Exams are a reality, and there are actually good arguments for continuing with an exam system to an extent. Because a certain level of base knowledge is actually very important for recognising false information. So when you're looking at something, whether it's AI generated or whether it's just something you found on the internet, in a book, in a newspaper, having some kind of level of prior knowledge is really helpful. Otherwise, we can't work out whether there is a basis of truth in what we're reading or not. So the exams aren't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe they could be done better. But it does mean that children's relationship with AI is necessarily, even just for this basic level, going to need to be different to adults, because they will be in situations where they're being assessed and they can't rely on it. And I would liken this to calculators in schools. So most of us as adults will use calculators or maybe spreadsheets in our everyday lives or in our jobs. And I think we can all agree that children ought to leave school knowing how to use a calculator. However, if you give a primary school child a calculator as soon as they start doing maths and they never learn to do mental arithmetic, then they never develop the kind of number sense that they need, both to be able to function without a calculator when necessary, but also just to be able to use a calculator well and to know whether the answer you're coming up with makes sense. And I think there are some similarities with AI and critical thinking that mean we need to be really, really careful about when it's introduced, how often it's used, and how it's used. Because if you introduce AI as tool of choice too early, then it really is possible to stunt children's critical thinking, even if you are a very strong advocate for AI use, which I'm not necessarily. The other thing to remember is that the American Psychological Association remind us that adolescence, which is a long period, ages 10 to 25, is a critical period for brain development. When these children are experiencing greater developmental changes in their brain in any other period of their life besides infancy. And that's actually why the use of AI with children in education matters so much. They're not just tiny adults. or not so tiny in the case of some of them, their brains are still developing, and the tools that they use and the way that they use them can have a really important impact on that development. So it's important that we're guided by the research and we look at what research is telling us, both about how children are using AI, how it might be useful and might not, but also about where children are at developmentally. So I think we can't get away from the fact that it is being used. So this survey from the Oxford University Press tells us that 8 out of 10 young people are using AI tools for their schoolwork, and this was an August 2025 survey. The library at school is full of students who we support at break and lunchtime doing their homework with and without AI, but also playing with AI as a tool, because that's something that children do. And that curiosity is quite important. And I'm certainly aware of one group of students who have a running joke that one of their friends is an extension of ChatGPT. And this is a live issue for our children, which we can't ignore, but we do need to be guiding and shaping this behaviour in a positive way. So if we look at that study, this is children's own self-reporting. Less than half reckon they could confidently tell which information was provided by the AI was true. Around a third reckoned they could confidently identify active misinformation, but 90% thought it was helping them to develop a schoolwork-related skill, which is positive. And then coming back, just about around a quarter thought that AI made it too easy for them to find answers without doing the work. Bearing in mind this is children's own self-reporting. This is what they say. So what their teachers and other adults around them would say might well be very different. So if we dig a little bit into that study to see, this is the 90% who reckoned that AI was supporting them in their learning. And you can see this is a wide variety of areas: understanding, solving problems, presenting thoughts clearly, coming up with new, better ideas. There's all sorts of different areas that they felt that the AI was helping them develop their skills. But I think this needs to be put up against the areas where young people were saying that AI was negatively impacting their skills. So against the headline figure of 90% who reckon that it's helping them to get better, there's 60% who feel that it's negatively impacting their schoolwork. So it's really quite a mixed picture. And if we look at these in pairs, 18% reckon that it's helping them to understand and solve problems, but 8% say they're less likely to be able to understand and solve problems because they're using AI. 15% said that it helped them present their thoughts more clearly, but 10% found it harder to write creatively because the AI was writing for them. 15% found the AI helped them come up with new or better ideas, but 12% said it limited their creative thinking. 11% reckoned it improved their work and got them better grades, whereas 26% said it made it too easy for them to find the answers without doing the work themselves. And then finally, that technical skills, 7% reckoned it improved their technical skills, where 5% reckoned it stopped them from being able to learn. So self-reporting is always an issue, and I think this mixed picture is really helping us to see how different children maybe use the tools differently, and maybe some of them are using them with learning more in mind. Maybe some of them are actually more reflective about the impact that it's having on their learning. So if we have a look a bit further, this article on the right reported a small-scale study from 2025 from MIT that showed students who used ChatGPT to help them plan and write an essay showed significantly less activity in areas of the brain associated with cognitive processing, attention and creativity, and they remembered far less of the material after handing it in. So to quote the article, in other words, whatever the people using ChatGPT felt was going on inside their brains, the scan showed that there wasn't much happening up there. There was another larger scale study from the Swiss Business School that found people who use AI more frequently scored lower on critical thinking, but they did put the warning in there that it's difficult to know whether that's causation or correlation, whether that is that people who are less good at critical thinking more tend to default to AI, or whether the AI is affecting the critical thinking. and that is another study that's needed. But the author of that wondered, are schools and universities still equipped to produce creative, original thinkers who will build better, more intelligent societies? Or is the education system going to churn out mindless, gullible AI essay writing drones? Because he was pointing out that actually adults who are using AI as a shortcut now went through education system before that was possible. So what will happen if the children who are going through the education system now default to AI? And actually, the article also goes on to point out how important it is to have that background knowledge and understanding of any topic you're researching so you can weed out false information. And that's why developing background knowledge is a key stage in the fossil inquiry cycle. That connect stage is really, really important, because you can't go out and start searching deeply for information until you really understand what you're looking for. So AI presents both opportunities and challenges, and it's really important to look at both. So, for example, allowing students to use AI to shortcut parts of tasks that are not the learning focus. So, for example, if you're producing a poster for your history homework, actually the learning focus isn't your artistic skills and how good you are at drawing. It's how you can incorporate the history that you've learnt into that poster. So if you can use AI prompts to generate images and add text that showcases the history that you're thinking about putting into the poster, then you are focusing on your subject-related skills rather than necessarily spending lots and lots of time drawing when that might not be the skill you're trying to focus on. Having said that, it's also possible that if you're not focused on your learning, that you're using it to shortcut the learning, that you're just asking it to do those subject-related skills for you. AI offers all sorts of opportunities in terms of personalisation of learning, in terms of allowing you to chart your own pathway through a topic, to ask questions that are appropriate to you, to use tools, so some of the tools like Duolingo and ED that we certainly use in our school, that allow you to follow a pathway that is appropriate, and the tool will guide you through towards stronger learning. However, I think also it's very easy for students to use tools to just reduce the thinking and do the thinking for them. And whereas shortcutting learning and reducing thinking, then the tool is harming your education. Increased autonomy, where you have access to a tool which can give you help and advice at any time of the day or night, where you might not necessarily have access to a teacher, can be very empowering for students if we can necessarily trust that it's giving the answers at the right level. On the other hand, the AI homeworks that schools are increasingly finding, cheating is harder to detect than it used to be. So teachers are needing to put more time and effort into working out whether this is actually the student's own work. And in terms of creativity, it's all up in the air, because it can, used in an appropriate way, really help students get their ideas out onto the page, to encourage them, to stimulate them, to increase their creativity. But equally, if it's used lazily, then it's reducing their creativity. So I think the difference on these two sides is that the opportunities are all process-centred. They're about a student and a teacher, where your focus is, what am I learning through this task? What am I learning through doing this, which may or may not involve AI, but the learning is important. Whereas the challenges side is all product-centred. The challenges side is all about, how do I get this piece of work done as quickly for the highest mark as possible? I'm not actually interested in what I'm learning, I'm interested in the piece of work. And I think that is the challenge, and has always been the challenge for schools, that children need to recognise that they are the product, not the work that they're producing. So AI is changing the way we interact with technology and information and each other in workplaces, schools and homes. And it has the potential for enormous benefit and for serious harm. So we need to be teaching and supporting our children to navigate this, to be thinking, creating, living, both with and without AI. And it needs to become a tool in the toolbox, not a default solution, which I think certainly for some of our children it has become. And ultimately, as I said at the beginning, student AI use and adult AI use, to be honest, is about integrity. It's about being invested in the learning process rather than trying to get the work done as quickly as possible. It's about understanding that they are the product, not the piece of work. And I think the best way for all of us to approach this is through these 3 golden questions. Is this use of AI helping me to learn or robbing me of a learning opportunity? Is it making me more or less creative? Would I be comfortable to openly acknowledge this use of AI? And I think this last one is actually very important for all of us. If we would be embarrassed if somebody found out that we'd use AI for something, then we probably shouldn't use it. If we're happy to acknowledge that use, then it might well be an appropriate use. And the earlier we can start children thinking about this, the better. So when we're thinking about that first question, is this use of AI helping me to learn or robbing me of a learning opportunity? Then thinking about the way we might use AI in schools, where you're using AI-powered tools that perhaps have been recommended by teachers like Duolingo, like Edie, then often that can be really helpful. And it's worth being guided by subject staff about what might be a helpful use and what might not. Revision help can also be a good thing. I think for some children, that mediation of AI is helpful because they get instant feedback. And I'm certainly aware of at least one of our Year 11 students who's in the library regularly who is using it to generate exam questions and to give him feedback on his answers. And when you're careful and you put in exactly what your exam subject is, exactly what your exam board is, because it's got a lot to draw on, that can actually be very productive, and that instant feedback can be very rewarding. BBC Bite Size do a really interesting guide to AI, and one of those segments is using AI for revision, and that's definitely worth visiting. In terms of thinking about using AI as a search engine, I think that is a sort of an interesting area. Generative AI isn't really designed as a search engine. That's what it's kind of become. But there are search engines that actually do a very good job as search engines. And if you are using the AI for that, you need to really be thinking about why. But it's inescapable. It's there as these summaries at the top of the searches that we do in a lot of the search engines that we use. So we can't expect students to ignore that. We need to be teaching them how to work with that. So AI summaries do often disguise the source of information. This has got better, but it's really hard to determine accuracy and bias and why this source is saying this, whether I can trust it or not, if you don't know what the source is. So if you look at this example from Google, you can see that it does actually put little link tags to show where the information for particular sections has come from, or at least it doesn't quite work like that. It's showing where you could get this information from, not necessarily where it has constructed the information from. And if you look at these links, if you click on the different link boxes, it will give you the different search results. You can see where it's from, and you can see, for example, this one has a mix of college and university sites. My search was how will AI impact education? Some of them are college and university sites, which actually seem a really good source for that kind of thing. But there's also some which are AI companies where I would be a little bit more anxious about using that. If you follow the link to the article itself, it then highlights the bit of the article that is similar to the AI generated summary, and that does allow you to broaden out a bit and see whether that is a good summary of that good section of that article, or whether you need a bit more nuance, whether there's more interesting things in the article that the AI summary didn't bring out. Other uses that students make, summarising longer documents, putting aside the issue that the summaries aren't always accurate. They can be pretty good. You do need a bit of background knowledge to be able to spot if there are obvious mistakes. But my concern with using them to summarise longer documents routinely in school is if you never practice skimming and scanning skills to extract relevant information, you'll never learn them, and those do remain important skills. The other use that we see is revision, that I've talked about already, that can be really useful. I wouldn't use it as the only tool in the box, because you do need to think about whether you're better off using revision materials provided by your teacher, which will be very specific to the topic that you're revising and what you've been taught, or tailored revision sites, which might be more tailored to your age group, or things like past papers remain really important. Even though they might seem more tedious, they might actually be more useful to you. And be really careful that the material that the AI revision tool is providing is sufficiently focused on what you need to learn. So if you are revising for your GCSEs, make sure you tell it what the exam board is, what the subject is, what any options papers are, so that it doesn't pull you off topic. So when we talk about AI robbing of learning opportunities, I think the danger of AI is that it's just too easy. And this is Alex Kosmina from the MIT study that I mentioned before, the author of that study. And she says, our brains love shortcuts. It's in our nature. But your brain needs friction to learn. It needs to have a challenge. And actually, without the challenge, it's very difficult to learn anything. So if AI makes everything too easy, it makes the learning too difficult. So in terms of areas where AI is making the learning too difficult, we are commonly seeing children putting their homework questions directly into AI and copying out the answers. And whether this is shorter answers or longer research projects and essays. And actually this term I came across a boy in the library answering some science questions using a textbook page, and it was really clear to me that the answers were on the page and that the job was to hunt for them, because that was the friction in the learning. And I suggested we have a look together to see if we could find them. But he said, no, I'd rather just put the questions into ChatGPT and it give them the answers, and then the homework is done. And that's not recognising that the teacher doesn't need the answers. The teacher knows the answers. The teacher needs you to have gone through that process of discovering the answers, because that's the learning that you're supposed to be doing. And the answers themselves aren't the point. I think the other one is getting AI to write for you or to rewrite for you. And tools like Grammarly can be helpful if you're using them as a learning tool rather than routinely rewriting with them and just accepting their corrections without thought. But when you're using them routinely and thoughtlessly, they do cause you to become too dependent and maybe incapable of writing without them. Remembering that our children are going to need to write in exams without these tools. So if they are used to the tool doing all the correction for them, that's going to be a problem for them when they come to exams. If you are using a tool like that with coursework, it's important to note that any AI tools embedded within them must be switched off. That's a JCQ rule, because the writing that you do with a tool like this can be flagged by an AI checker. And it's worth noting that the age restriction for a Grammarly account is actually 16 plus at the moment. The final one here is that languages teachers tell me that it's increasingly common for students to just put large chunks of text into online translation tools and copy out the answers. And they say that using a computer as a dictionary is fine. But if you're just using it to do the whole translation, again, that friction is gone. You're not thinking about the grammar constructions and the learning disappears. So it's really difficult now for languages teachers setting homework, because the default for students is to just get online tools to translate for them. So when we're thinking about more or less creative, actually there are some very creative uses that can be made with AI. And sometimes brainstorming new projects can be helpful, but you do need to check with your teacher whether that's something that you're being marked on. So particularly in things like the project qualifications that I supervise, and I'm the coordinator for HPQ and EPQ at my school, I'm very wary of using them too much, particularly in the early stages, because you have to make sure that you have shown your thinking in the process, and it's too easy to rely on the AI for that thinking. But for example, in drama, our students are sometimes asked to use AI to write plays for them, so that they can then focus on the staging, because the playwriting isn't the point of the mark. And I've had an HPQ student who very successfully used AI to generate images for his website artifacts, because he wasn't being marked on the images. He was being marked on the structure, the way he put the site together, the educational value of the site that he was making. So this was actually a very valid use, because it enabled him to focus on the things he was actually being marked for. In creative arts subjects, AI image generation is more challenging, and I think it does mean that students are losing opportunities across the board for practicing their drawing, painting, creative skills in other subjects, like, for example, the history poster I was talking about earlier, because if you are using AI to shortcut that part of the learning, you're not getting that practice that would then be helping you with your art. And certainly lower down, there is very little creative use of AI that will help you with your basic art skills, although I'm sure there are lots of innovative uses that can be made within particular projects, but you definitely want to talk to your art teachers about that. I do think it's a double-edged sword as well. Certainly with this AI-generated historical figures chat, really, really interesting. Very important to help children remember that these are not the actual historical figures. We have no idea what answer they would have given to certain questions. So it's creating an illusion that we need to be very careful that the children understand where the historical figure begins and ends. Also, in terms of creativity, Michael Gerlich from the Swiss Business School, from the study that I mentioned earlier about AI and critical thinking, said that if you put a query into an AI to ask it to help you develop a better candle, it might make you a really good candle, but it's never going to help you develop an energy efficient light bulb. So the creativity is limited there by our queries, and actually those leaps that we might make in the human brain, if we are routinely relying on AI for creativity, are lost. So he said that as happened in many workplaces, companies roll out tools such as chatbot Copilot without offering decent AI training, and they risk producing teams of passable candle makers in a world that demands high efficiency light bulbs. And we need to be careful not to lose the human creativity in the process. And finally, on the subject of creativity, I wanted to read you some excerpts from an award-winning breakup letter to ChatGPT by a 16-year-old girl that was published in the New York Times. The whole letter is definitely worth reading, and I will leave a link to that letter with the video. But these two extracts really struck me. At first, I told myself I was being resourceful and efficient. It was working smarter to have you articulate my thoughts, so why should I work harder when you always had the answer? But slowly your voice started to replace my own, and I couldn't write a paragraph without wondering how you would say it. The more I relied on you, the less I challenged myself. Originality is hard, flawed, and messy, but that's what makes it real. If me and 400 million weekly users rely on you for every spark, every idea, and every sentence, then eventually we'll leave our own voices behind and you will speak for us all. I don't want every good idea in the world to come from the same blueprint, so I'm stepping away right now. And that's a really powerful message from a 16-year-old girl. It's actually a letter that I have up in the library, and it starts some really interesting conversations with our students. So in terms of open acknowledgements, I had a conversation with a Year 10 student the other day who'd done really well in an assignment, but had used AI without citing it, and just wasn't sure how to feel because he felt guilty. He felt that he didn't deserve the mark that he had. And actually, this open acknowledgement is, as well as being an ethical issue and a learning issue, I think there is a sort of emotional element for our students as well. If you have this constant kind of uncertainty of your own worth and your own value because you don't know what is okay for the AI to have done and what for you to have done, and you feel like an imposter all the time because you're doing your work with AI, that's not a good situation for your mental health. So I think if students are upfront right from the start about the use that they make, it helps that dialogue between teacher and student about the learning that's happening and talking about the point of the exercises they set and where AI is and isn't appropriate. Now, as far as coursework is concerned, all uses of AI must be referenced with screenshots, and students should be practicing this right from the first time they start using it, so that it becomes second nature. And we should, for their own academic integrity, be having open conversations about when AI use is and isn't appropriate, referencing when it's used as we should for any other source, talking about when we're using it as adults, when it is and isn't appropriate, what the risks and the benefits are. AI use would be much less of a problem all round if there wasn't something furtive and guilty about it. Either we are comfortable with the use that we're making, or we shouldn't do it. And there isn't really a middle line. If we aren't sure, then we're having conversations, and those conversations will either make us comfortable or they will mean that we stop. But we shouldn't be hiding it and kind of hoping that nobody notices. And we shouldn't be, by stealth, teaching our children to do the same. It's all right if you used AI as long as I don't notice. So in terms of JCQ, the body that oversees coursework, the rules are really clear. Students may not use AI in exams. They can use it under some circumstances in coursework as long as it is clearly cited using the rules shown on the screen. So you have to reference, you name the tool used, you add the date, you explain how you used it, and you give a screenshot. Really important, they have to know that before they start, because you can't generate these screenshots after the event. They are one-time events. Conversations with AI are different every time. So it's worth remembering that students won't get any marks for any thinking that the AI has done for them, using that word advisedly. So it's vital to be guided by teachers in terms of what you're actually being marked on, and to talk to teachers in advance about planned uses so they don't lose marks further down the line. And it's really helpful if these conversations are starting further down the school before coursework becomes an issue. So moving on to the final section, there is really serious global concern, alongside all that about social media use, about the impact of extensive use of AI chatbots on some children. From generation of inappropriate images that hit the headlines recently, to bullying, to chatbots encouraging suicidal thoughts. And there are a number of court cases going ahead, particularly in the States, about this. So how do we get behind that hysteria to make sure that our children are keeping safe online, and particularly keeping safe when they're using things like that are new and emerging, like the AI chatbots? So this article from Stanford Medicine talks about the difference between children's brains and adults' brains in terms of AI companions. And it explains quite clearly why AI companions can be more dangerous for children than for adults. That blurring of the distinction between fantasy and reality that chatbots create can be really quite potent for young people, because their brains aren't fully mature. The prefrontal cortex, which is critical for decision making, for impulse control, for emotional regulation, for understanding social situations, is still developing. And tweens and teens are much more likely to act impulsively, to form intense attachments, to compare themselves more with their peers, and to push and challenge social boundaries. And one of the key differences is that with human relationships is that large language models tend to be sycophantic. So they tend to tell you what you want to hear and give you your preferred answers, because they are designed to keep you talking. They want you to like them, or they're designed for you to like them. So they are designed to tell you what you want to hear. And this creates these frictionless relationships without all the rough spots that come up in normal human relationships, where your friend disagrees with you, you have an argument, you want to do something different, you have to negotiate. And those are really important for learning to interact with people. And they're really good for children. They're really good for all of us. If you say something that is nonsensical, something that is dangerous, something that is untrue, you want your friends to push back. You need your friends to push back and to tell you that you're being ridiculous. You need them to help you to work out how to function in human society. and to function with people who don't necessarily agree with you all the time. So it is actually very dangerous if you have a system that is telling you that all of your opinions are valid all of the time, and that your suicidal ideation is a valid way to be thinking. And this is where these systems are getting into trouble and getting children into trouble. And even although safeguards are being built in, even just the everyday not wanting to go to the same restaurant as somebody else, not having the same political opinion as somebody else, is very important for shaping our characters and shaping our social interaction. And it's not there in these chatbot relationships. So how do we keep our children safe? What can we do? And a lot of the advice is very similar to other online safety advice, and it centres on clear communication. So watch out for those key behaviour changes. Watch out for a child who is wanting to spend increasing amounts of time alone, not talking to their friends, is interacting more with the chatbots than with their friends. A lot of children interact with each other online, which can be healthy, but if they're interacting with the chatbot more than with their friends, that becomes an issue. Be curious about your children's online lives. Make their online world a part of your everyday conversation. Make your online world a part of the everyday conversation, that it's just normal life, that we're talking about how we're negotiating these things. Discuss the risks and benefits of AI in a neutral, curious way. Talk about news stories you've seen. Talk about concerns you have, but also exciting things that you've seen that it can do. And include in those discussions about sharing of personal data and images, and what can happen to that data and to those images, and why those things might be dangerous. Set up children's accounts with parental controls wherever possible, and particularly avoid sharing accounts. It's very tempting to just let your child use your account for something because it's better than sharing their personal data to set up a new account, perhaps. But actually, there are some of the sites are quite good at putting in controls, and there are legal restrictions, particularly for children under 13. There are legal restrictions about what companies can do with children's data. So if they are using an adult account, then there are far fewer restrictions about what the companies can do with that data. And note that companies are increasingly using AI to profile and predict the age of the user on a particular account. So if you've got adults and children using the same account, that's very confusing for those models, and it will make it very difficult for them to put the appropriate safeguards in place. And then the final one is about setting reasonable time limits and thinking about whether you have screen time limits, but you also have extra limits about using AI, and maybe not all the time on a screen is AI time. So beyond all of those educational challenges, there are massive societal issues with rapid development of AI that are beyond the scope of this presentation. I haven't got time. But they are exceptionally important, and they need to be part of the ongoing conversation. In particular, thinking about things like data privacy, security, ownership, who owns that data, who's going to use it, can it end up being made public? What securities and safeguards have you got? Environmental issues with energy and water use. We particularly have a lot of these conversations at home because image and video generation are exciting for children to play with, but generating one AI image can use as much as 30 times the energy of generating AI text. And one study I read said that generating a 30-second AI video uses as much energy as running an electric oven for nearly 3 days. So there are big issues when climate change is still hitting the headlines. There are widespread ethical concerns relating to things like intellectual property, copyright, what happens when AI is taking material without acknowledgement and the copyright holders aren't seeing any benefit from that. But also about the long hours of viewing unpleasant and violent content for poorly paid workers, often in the third world, in these efforts to make AI safe for everybody else. There's a lot of ethical issues about the way the companies function in the background. And of course, the proliferation of AI slop that makes it harder to find valuable and authentic content and is overwhelming some of the human created content. So children need to be part of the conversation about how AI is changing the world, for better and for the worse, because it's the world that they're inheriting. So let's include them in those conversations, invite them in, get them to do some of their own research and be excited about what they find and what they're telling you. But check it out too and make sure that they're getting a realistic image. So finally, we spoke at the start about academic integrity and the role of education shaping character in equipping children to deal with whatever they're going to face in life. So curiosity is a hugely valuable tool in learning, and children are naturally curious, and we should be encouraging them to explore within safe limits because that is the way that they learn. But we also need to be very aware that their attitudes and responses will be shaped by what they see us doing and the conversations that we have with them around that. And children will develop the healthiest relationships with tools like AI if we're all exploring and discussing together. And our college mission statement is together learning to become all that God wants us to be. And I think a key word in that is together, that we are all learning at the moment. We're all learning all the time, but particularly with something new like this. And we must constantly remind ourselves in the busyness of everyday life that actually the product of education, the product of childhood, is the young people themselves. And we need them to be curious and interested, but we need to be curious and interested in them, because actually the product of childhood is the young people themselves, not the work that they produce. And getting all hung up on cheating and detecting cheating and trying to stop that has completely missed the point that academic integrity is all about learning and it's all about character. And if we are helping our young people to develop the right character and the right attitudes towards their learning, then it will be much easier for us to help them to negotiate this new area of AI.